So let's stay on that for a minute. Then you're bringing up what's classically known as gematria, that every Hebrew letter, is equivalent to another number. Aleph 1, Bet 2, Gimel 3, so on and so forth. And then when you put these words together, like you just did, Samech, Vav, Dalid, those three Hebrew letters, Sod, which refers to Kabbalah, the secrets, is the same as 70. So your books are filled with these incredible gematrias, these numerical equivalencies, and that give these deeper insights into the text of the Torah. Your website, even, I saw, has a search engine for the entire Tanakh for gematria. Now, there is pushback. Sometimes when I, in my, maybe not in my MJE life, there's a lot of respect kind of from my students for a lot of these things I haven't really studied. But I don't know, from the yeshiva world in which I was raised, sometimes I get a little rolling of the eyes when I quote a gematria. They're like, oh, come on, that's so convenient. And sometimes the gematrias aren't perfect. They're a little one-off. And then you have to give another little Dvar Torah to explain why it's a little one-off. Why do you think, I'm thinking of one of my sons right now, who's like, he studies a lot of Kabbalah and Hasidus, but like somehow the gematria thing just seems a little too convenient for him. Why do you think this is? And what would you say to someone like that that's a little cynical about the significance of gematria and our belief that it can illuminate this kind of divine design within the Torah? Because I think one of the reasons we're attracted to gematrias, to these numerical equivalents, is because it seems like hidden within the text, there's something like, oh, no human being could have come up with that, kind of thing. And it's like a little of a trigger to divinity. And we're all looking for divinity in our lives, in our personal lives. And we're looking for it, some kind of evidence in the Bible that this comes from a higher place. It wasn't just written by a bunch of men. What can you tell us about gematrias that bespeak that?
Okay, so I would say if someone, especially if someone is learned and looks down at gematria, I would say that's really a shame. Because if you look in the Talmud uses gematria. Sure. If you look in Rashi uses gematria. In all of the, one of the most important commentaries is called the Balaturim from around 1,000 years ago. He is, and we have to understand, he is the one who established the order that was adopted by the Shulchan Aruch for what's called the backbone of Jewish law today. So the Balaturim was a legalist, and yet he wrote a commentary that is highly Kabbalistic, and it's almost completely based on gematrias and numbers. So that's what I would say to someone who is learned. They're missing out on something that the sages gave us, something that our greatest of the commentaries gave us. It could be that, people have, because maybe in other like cultures, they play number games and people associate it with. But we have to understand, and again, if anyone looks at this commentary, the Balaturim, and there's a tremendous set in English put out by Art Scroll, which is very good. Phenomenal. But it's not just gematria. The entire Torah, there is a numerical code running through the entire Torah, not just the gematrias. For example, you could see it in Art Scroll. Art Scroll is considered very middle of the road for people who are less familiar with Jewish thought and those who are more familiar. At the end of every parsha, there's a little note that says how many verses are in that parsha. And Rabbi David Feinstein makes a like a drasha, makes an explanation. Why does this parsha have these many verses? So it's not just gematrias. There are, like I said, there's a numerical code running through the Torah. And there's significance to how many letters in a verse, how many words in a verse, how many letters and words in a portion, how many in a book. In fact, in the Talmud itself, it points out what is the middle letter of the Torah, what is the middle word of the Torah. Mm-hmm. And even in art school, sometimes they point out what's the middle letter of one of the books of the Torah. Now, these are ancient traditions. So someone who is somewhat cynical about this, I would say that it's misplaced. Mm-hmm. Now, just like anything, Gematria can be misused and can turn into kind of like a fun exercise. But that's not what Gematria is. Gematria points out below the surface connections between ideas, concepts, and words that we wouldn't catch without it.
Okay, so 2 questions on that. This is really excellent. This is so helpful, and you're explaining this so clearly for us. Number one is, do you think, therefore, it is a basis for believing that the Torah comes from a higher place? Do you think that's a good, I'm not saying to put all of your faith in God and in Judaism in these gematrias, but do you think that should be part of, seeing that there's this rhythm, that there's this code, these numbers? I guess you could be a little cynical and say, well, a group of mathematicians, if they wrote the Bible, if they sat down to come up with something, maybe they could have embedded within, they could have embedded within some sort of text, some ancient text, some numerical, equivalence between words here and there. And therefore maybe that's not a good basis for belief. And then number two, I assume that you only are going to accept gematrias that are brought down in Jewish tradition, not people making up their own. I found a little phrase here that's got this number and it equivalent to that. It's missing 2 numbers, so we'll explain this like that. That's probably what turns people off a little.
You're 100% right. When gematria isn't used correctly, and it's kind of like, we'll make it fit.
Yeah.
Right.
For those of you listening and not watching, Rabbi Trugman is doing all sorts of contortions with his hands and arms. Okay. Yeah.
And I agree. If someone would hear how some people use it, but again, if we look at our ancient sources and we see the deep richness that it brings out in the text. I'll give an example. A microscope. If I look at my hand, so I see fingers, I can actually see the tendons running through my hand. Sometimes you can see your blood vessels. Now, what happens if I put my hand under a microscope? All of a sudden, I can see the individual hairs that might be on my hand, the individual wrinkles that I can't see really sharply with my eye. Now, what happens if you up the focus or the power of the microscope? All of a sudden, you see through the hand and you start seeing the cells. And what happens if you up, again, the power of the microscope? Then you'll see the incredible world within the cells. Up it again, then you see the atoms inside of and then again, then you see the particles. So the numerical code in the Torah is like putting the text under a microscope.
Wow.
And all of a sudden you see things that you couldn't even imagine are there. I'm going to share something very, very, very personal. I am a Baal Tshuva. I was not brought up religiously, far from it. I came to it in my mid-20s, and different people come into Torah either through the mind or something above the mind. In other words, through logic, proving the Torah, proving God, or for me is the more I learn Torah, and Baruch Hashem, with the incredible teachers that I had, and they started to show me what's below the English translation of the Torah, that is what convinced me of the divinity of the Torah, was understanding, as I began, this idea of pardes, the simple, the alluded to, the symbolic, and the mystical. And the more one delves into the Torah, below the surface, with the imagery of the microscope, all of a sudden we see what you said, that we're convinced that it can't be anything but divine.